Oops. All right. Are we seeing people coming in?
65.
So welcome. We're going to wait a minute and see if people will be able to join us. So we'll get started in just a minute, please. And Emily, if you're ready, you want to just get started?
Sure. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are today. I'm just going to provide you with a few logistics for today's webinar on HSIs and the changing landscape. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of our panelists' presentations. All of our attendees are muted, so for any questions that you may have throughout, please use the Q&A feature that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. To submit those questions. You also may submit any comments through the chat feature. Your questions will be curated throughout the panelists' presentations, and we will be asking them during the Q&A session at the end. If you happen to experience any technical issues, we ask that you please reach out to msantiago@edexcelencia.org. Thanks so much.
Sarita.
Good afternoon. This is Sarita Brown, President of Excelencia in Education. Time is the most precious thing that all of us have, and so we are so grateful that you are sharing yours with us. This webinar has been organized to consider HSIs at a critical moment of change like none of us has ever seen. The session has been organized to key off of key analysis, which Excelencia brings to you to look at the question of the context of our society right now, the role of higher education, and all of it against the backdrop in terms of developing HSIs, the Title V program. We are taking full advantage of the activity and advocacy of people in the public sector in the CARES Act. And we are very grateful that we will do this today in real time with leaders on colleges and universities across this country. I wanted to highlight our panel and then turn things over to them. We have Deborah Santiago, co-founder and CEO of Excelencia in Education. Beatriz Ceja, the HSI Division Director of the Department in the Department of Education. Janette Martinez, Senior Policy and Research Analyst at Excelencia. And we're very pleased to be joined this afternoon by Congressman Gilbert Cisneros, who is representing California, the 39th District. With this as the setting, I'll turn things over to Deborah.
Thank you, Sarita. So I want to go in a little bit more detail so you know what to expect in this conversation today that we hope to have with you. As Sarita shared, it gave us a little bit of a welcome and a sense of overview of this conversation we're having today at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We want to talk to you a little bit about the current status of HSIs and the current list that Excelencia released about 2 weeks ago. And then we want to talk about HSIs and Title V specifically. And then we want to talk about why it matters, especially in this changing landscape. And then we want to talk about the CARES Act, and then how important it is to intentionally serve our students, especially our Latino students in this day and age with what's happening with the pandemic, as well as every day, and then get some reflections and takeaways from Congressman Cisneros. And at the end, we'll have about 10 minutes or so, we hope, for questions and answers. So that was me. Let me get started with what I know is critical for us, and that's taking a look at the data, what we know about HSIs. So at Excelencia, we are in our 16th year, and we've been looking at HSI since before we actually started the organization. And that was back in the day when I was a policy and budget analyst in the U.S. Department of Education. And in 1995, the first funding came in for HSIs, and the department didn't know how to do the outreach and engage at that time. And I was a policy and budget analyst then, and that started a journey because we decided to use IPEDS data to calculate the eligible institutions. So what you see here is where we are in 2018-19. We've been tracking HSIs and those that are meet the definition for 25 years now. And in 2018-19, the latest data available, we saw there are 539 institutions that meet the definition of an HSI, and we'll tell you in a minute what that is. That means that 17% of institutions in this country are educating 67% of all Latino undergraduates in this country. That's significant representation and concentrated enrollment. And when we look a little bit deeper, we see that almost 70% of the institutions that meet this definition are public, and almost 55% are four-year institutions. And this is important because we've seen change over time in the eligibility of institutions as the Latino population has grown. So in 2009-10, after tracking these institutions for almost 15 years at that time, Excelencia created this term called emerging HSIs. And the reason we created it was because we wanted to see what is this critical mass, what is this idea that an institution will change to serve students better. And emerging HSI was a way for us to try and track how close we were, how many institutions were getting close to the HSI definition for eligibility. So in our latest analysis, we see there are 352 institutions that fit this definition of an emerging HSI, which is 15 to 24.9% undergraduate Hispanic full-time equivalent enrollment. That means that we have the majority of states, 35 states now have an emerging HSI, and many of them are public, although increasingly we see a good number that are private, and increasingly four-year institutions. So those trends that you saw in the previous slide means that's going to continue to grow. I wanted to share with you here, because of this 25 years of tracking, kind of where we are in terms of the growth of HSIs. So the number has doubled over 25 years. It says 22 there, right? And you see that projection is, especially the last 10 years, has been incredibly significant. Very much aligned to what we see about the Latino college enrollment growth. And you see that concentrated enrollment overall. So while that number has doubled in the numbers of institutions that are HSIs, Latino student enrollment has tripled, and that's pretty significant. I want to share with you also the geography. So half of all states in this country have an HSI today, right? There is a concentration. We tend to have more so in states that are expected, like California, Texas, New York, Florida, Puerto Rico, and increasingly Illinois. But there are also states that you don't often think about the growth of Latino population. So in Washington State, in Oregon, Nevada, Louisiana, right? So Oklahoma. So we are seeing, as the growth of the population, you're also seeing the representation in places that we might not have expected. That means paying attention to this concentrated enrollment of Latinos and where they are enrolling is increasingly important for our country. I want to get to what that means overall. So I started with the data, so you got a sense of what we've been tracking for 25 years. And wanted to get to this point, which is talking about what is the actual definition of an HSI. I know when we talk across the country, I'll often ask this question, and I get variations of it. Often it's 25% Hispanic. That's not bad, but according to the definition that's in the Higher Education Act, it's a little bit more specific, and it matters in the calculation of HSI list that we've been doing for the last 25 years. So in federal law, the Higher Education Act, HSIs are defined as accredited and degree-granting public or private, not-for-profit institutions of higher education with 25% or more total undergraduate Hispanic full-time equivalent student enrollment. And that really matters, because if you just take a look at headcount and all students, if an institution has graduate students, that number will change. The FTE is important full-time equivalent, because the basic definition of that is 3 part-time students equals 1 full-time equivalent. And so we generally have to add all of our full-time students, calculate the FTE, and then add them up to get to the number to see if the institution has 25% or more undergraduate FTE, Hispanic student enrollment. So there's some institutions that wouldn't hit just 25 Hispanic, wouldn't be in this list. And then it is important that they're degree granting and public or private. So for-profit institutions are not eligible according to the Higher Education Act to be an HSI. They were first recognized in 1992, and this is part of Title III, Part A, Section 316, because I was in the Department of Education in 94. And this was defined in Developing HSIs program. The additional component of this that distinguishes our list from others that you would find, like from the Department of Education, which has designated eligibility, is that the definition of an HSI in the Higher Education Act is based on enrollment, not mission to serve, like many of our HBCUs and our tribal colleges are, but that there's additional criteria to be eligible for the Developing HSI program. And it requires that HSIs, so you hit that enrollment threshold, but do you have a high enrollment of needy students and low core, which is educational general expenditures? And that is a threshold that's often created, and our colleague is going to speak to this, Ceja. But I wanted to just give you context of why you might see different numbers and why it matters, right? The Excelencia since 2011 has worked in partnership with HACU, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, to release the list of HSIs. We share our list with them so that they, as an organization that represents HSIs and its membership base, that is their responsibility and their commitment as an organization. They uniquely play that role. Excelencia, we're an independent organization. We don't represent HSIs. We, as independent, we do our research and engage and think about what does it mean to serve. But it is important that we think about that, because there's a different list for eligibility for a program because it has additional criteria than it is the enrollment definition that's predicated in the federal definition. And that what you see is that you see the same list, whether it's HACU, which represents HSIs, or Excelencia, which is an independent organization. And that is a little different from the federal government because it's a program-specific need. But there are other federal agencies that use a list like ours because they don't have those requirements for eligibility for their programs. And then the last thing I'll say is that, well, HSIs were recognized in federal law in 1992. It had come from the community years before. So this wasn't the first time that this identification of HSIs was created. It was the first time it was recognized in federal law. In the 2008 reauthorization, excuse me, the 1998 reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, and it says 2008, but 1998 reauthorization, the Developing HSI program was moved from Title III to Title V. And so often when we talk about this program, people will say the Title V program as opposed to Developing HSIs. And my apologies, that was a typo. It should say 1998, not 2008. 2008 was the last year the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act occurred. Then I'm going to hand it over to B. Ceja, who can talk to us a little bit more about Title V and HSIs and the list. B?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Deborah, thank you for that great introduction as to the list and why our list often is different from the one that Excelencia publishes. And by the way, thank you so much to Excelencia for taking the time to do this work and to ensuring that this list gets published. And so I'll let you know pretty much why it's important to ensure that your campus is on both lists. So as Deborah mentioned, the list that Excelencia spent so much time putting together is very useful both to the Department of Ed, but also to a number of other agencies, because as Deborah mentioned, a number of other agencies have programs that are targeted to institutions that meet the definition of an HSI. That said, they are not bound to that definition that we have in the Higher Education Act. And as such, we often send individuals who ask questions as to, do we know what schools have high percentages of Hispanic students enrolled? We often send them to Excelencia's website to their list, because they will have the most comprehensive list of all schools that meet that 25% threshold. That said, for the purpose of the Developing Hispanic-Serving Institutions eligibility, and so I think that's where I want to make the distinction, that there is program-specific eligibility. That's one definition that an institution must meet in order to be eligible for the funding that is available out of the programs that are targeted to HSIs that require that definition. And so these programs include not only the Developing Hispanic-Serving Institutions program, they also include the Promoting Post-Baccalaureate Opportunities for Hispanic Americans. And this definition also applies to the STEM, the Hispanic-Serving Institutions STEM and Articulation program. So there are 3 programs that are funded out of and administered out of the Division of Hispanic-Serving Institutions that use this specific definition. And that definition is one that, at the time of the application, it has an enrollment of undergraduate time equivalent students that is at least 25%. So that's the first portion of the definition that an institution must meet. The second portion is what Deborah mentioned, which are the core expenditures. And I'm not going to read what's all included in the core expenditures, but it does have to do with general expenses, as well as low average educational and general expenditures. And you can find the exact language for what is meant by core expenditures in 34 CFR education parts 606.3 is where you can actually find the language specific to the core expenditures. So just going back to that part about the core expenditures, every year between the month of November and January, we publish a federal notice in the Federal Register that announces that we are now accepting applications for Title III and Title V eligibility. So what we do then is we take the information from IPEDS with respect to the core expenditures, as well as the demographic data for each of our Title III and Title V programs. And what gets developed is an eligibility matrix that basically identifies those schools that, if we take all the information from IPEDS, those schools that would meet the definition, both for 25% as well as for core expenditures. If an institution meets that definition with the data that is in IPEDS, then a letter is generated letting you know that you are potentially eligible to apply for Title III or Title V programs. That letter is also used to provide schools with a waiver for the matching requirements of Title IV of the work study. And so there are a lot of campuses that are looking for that letter for that particular reason. For the Title V programs, we take everyone that is eligible using the eligibility matrix, or those institutions that submitted an application. Because if you don't show eligible under the matrix, there's an opportunity for the institution to submit an application. If the application is denied, there is a third opportunity for an institution to meet the core expenditures by submitting documentation to potentially get the core expenditures waived. And again, if you refer to the regulations for this program, there are seven different options or 7 different types of documentation that an institution can submit to have that part of the definition waived. Once we get that full list of everybody that has met the eligible institution eligibility for core expenditures, we will take the demographic data of the most up-to-date information in IPEDS. For this year, we take the 2018-2019. So there are some of you that did not show up as eligible for Title V because although you had the core expenditures met in 2017, 2018, you did not have the demographic data. But for the portion of the demographic data, we do use the 2018, 2019. And so that is where you may find some discrepancy between the list that Excelencia generates and those that are listed in the eligibility matrix. So with that, Deborah.
Thank you, Bea. I appreciate you giving us a little bit more detail. You know, part of that speaks into this next side of it, which is why does this matter? You know, the reality is that we are in a situation with a very changing landscape. Overall, but certainly for Latinos as well as the community of higher education as it exists. So a little bit about that. You know, we know that Latinos represent this post-traditional majority of students in higher education today. And increasingly that traditional profile, you know, is that student that goes straight from high school to college, is college ready, lives on campus, enrolls full-time, and finishes a degree in 4 years. They tend to not be the first in their family to go to college, and they don't work necessarily while they're enrolled. And they have a lot of choices based on the things that we understand with conventional wisdom, things like financial aid, academic programs, and institutional prestige. The post-traditional student profile is when where, you know, they might be stopping out and swirling, might live off campus and might need some academic support as they start in their collegiate experience. They might be the first in their family, they're may be taking more than 4 years to complete, more likely to be students of color, and probably working. And often their choices are made by other factors, like what is affordable, what the cost is, not just affordability. So we raise this because we know that Latinos increasingly represent that. In fact, less than 20% of students today represent that traditional student profile. Although we often think about that when we do policy and all of our work, we keep thinking of that traditional student. Maybe that's because that's how many of us were able to go. But that is not the majority of students today. So it's important to acknowledge that Latinos represent this post-traditional majority of students. And on top of that, HSIs are increasingly enrolling these post-traditional majority of students. And therefore, HSIs increasingly represent post-traditional institutions. So what institutions, what they're doing, how they're engaging or not, and how they're serving their students is increasingly important because they're not only just enrolling these post-traditional students with that profile, but they're also changing the way institutions are acting or engaging, or they can be. So here's kind of a quick summary of what we were thinking about in terms of this changing landscape. And so appreciate all of you making time during this kind of almost unprecedented time in our country. And it's gone on for 2 months, certainly for Excelencia and others. And we know that even before the pandemic, there were changes happening in higher education or tensions that we were addressing. First, this acknowledgement of demographic shifts, right? The Latino population is one of the 2 fastest growing, but in absolute numbers, it is the population that needs to be addressed in higher education overall. It is the growth population that is almost college ready and is going to college. And that was already happening. And we know with good work knocking at the college door and these projections are going to continue. And that's going to continue till about 2030 was what was pre-pandemic. And then there were questions about the value proposition and sustainability of the business model that is higher education. We saw increasing student debt is influencing the choices and limiting options for students, as well as being raised in media and other attention. And then from a policy perspective, we increasingly we're hearing much more focus on either free college and or debt forgiveness as a way of addressing higher education and the needs that we saw overall. And now with this, this very unfortunate situation, the pandemic, you know, what is very striking to us at Excelencia, and I know many of you who are participating in this conversation, is that, look, the pandemic made more public inequities we already knew existed. And it's, you know, in some ways it's very sad to hear the stories of students who are having to struggle in institutions to serve them. But this didn't just happen with the pandemic, and we're very aware of that. But maybe they're more, it's more public now because of the need to have that shift quickly, right? So I think there are questions like, will the number of HSIs, given what we had projected with enrolling, emerging HSIs, will they grow or will they stagnate? If the definition is predicated on enrollment, you know, we often have seen in economics that more during recessions, more folks enroll in higher education. Not so confident that's going to happen in this landscape, given the other issues that were taking place before the pandemic even hit us, about the value proposition, about the need work for readiness. Increasingly, that profile of post-traditional student is going to continue to grow. It's not going to decrease. And in doing so, so do the opportunities institutions have to address. Now, we know with the pandemic and, you know, that many institutions pivoted quickly. And it was just critical to see that they were focusing more on students. I think this could have been done all along, but, you know, part of the challenges we face from a policy perspective, but also thinking about HSIs and others is that, you know, is this just going to be a short-term transformation? Making sure students get access to computers and hotspots, that faculty are getting the support they need to make sure their students are educated well and are able to provide the quality education that's so critical to what they do, or not. Or is it just short term and, you know, come the fall or the end of the year or whatever, are we going to go back to what we were doing before? With this awareness of the inequities and the students that we're trying to serve, are we paying attention to that? And can we think about this, you know, the institutional transformation that needs to happen, not just for the short term and for a pandemic like this, but that the opportunity to transform the institution for the longer term, to be more intentional in serving your students and not have things by chance or because the pandemic brought awareness that wasn't there before. And that's core to knowing who your students are and part of serving. I'm going to hand it over to Janette Martinez, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the CARES Act. And, you know, these are the data that just were released, I think, last week. It hasn't even been a week. And Excelencia, with leadership that Janette provided, we've been trying to make sure that we understand this, because this takes us back to what the current landscape is and what's happening with HSIs. Janette.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you also to Bea, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. As Deborah said, we've been doing some analysis of the allocations in the CARES Act to understand what's happening at the national level to support Hispanic-serving institutions. So as you know, the CARES Act provided over $14 billion of funding to institutions of higher education, and most of that funding was allotted based on two pieces: Pell enrollment, 75% based on their Pell enrollment and 25% non-Pell student, using the full-time equivalent enrollment, which Deborah gave us a great overview of when she was explaining how that FTE equivalent plays into the HSI definition. The CARES Act also set aside an additional $1 billion for minority-serving institutions, so those institutions that get funding through Title III and Title V, which includes HBCUs, tribal colleges, and of course, Hispanic-serving institutions. So in total, HSIs, the 539 institutions, those who meet the definition, received about $3.5 billion through the CARES Act. So how did that funding break down? The vast majority comes from that initial $12 billion that were allocated based on the Pell FTE enrollment. And this, I know people have been asking if this will be posted online, and it will, so you can look at the numbers a little bit more closely. But over 90% of that funding came through those student emergency grants, and another 1.6 billion through the institutional allocation. 5% of that $3 billion came through the Developing HSI program. So those institutions that met the Title V eligibility definition, which was about 400 institutions, and those with graduate programs also received some funding as well. The next one. So how did HSIs fare compared to other institutions in the CARES Act from that initial $12 billion of funding? They received about $3.3 billion this way, making up about 26% of all funding that went out to institutions. The next, thank you. And one thing that's important to know is there's two, like I said, two major points that played into this, into the allotment. So that includes full-time enrollment and Pell recipients. So HSIs have a larger enrollment of Pell recipients than non-Hispanic-Serving Institutions. So over half of students at HSIs are Pell recipients, whereas 42% of those students at non-HSIs are Pell recipients. So this is a group of institutions serving students with high needs. However, more students at HSIs are enrolled part-time than students at non-HSIs. And remember that Deborah said that about 3 part-time students make 1 full-time student. And the CARES Act distributed funding based on the FTE, the full-time equivalent, rather than headcount, rather than counting every single student. And so we see less than half of students at HSIs are enrolled full-time. So how did that play out into, on average, what students or what HSIs received? So using FTE, it looks like HSIs received more than non-HSIs, over $1,000 per student. But that number drops dramatically when we look at headcount, about $700 per student when we're counting every single student. This is something that's important to point out because it's every student affected by this pandemic is going to need some sort of support. It's not like if you are enrolling part-time, you're only being part-time affected by this. So this is where thinking through the data points that we use in order to distribute funding to these institutions that are supporting and Latino students is key to keep in mind moving forward. And then last but not least, I mentioned that there was the $1 billion of additional funding on top of the initial $12 billion that went out to institutions that HSIs were eligible for. So about 400 institutions received some funding through this $1 billion pot, which made up about between the Developing HSIs and the post-baccalaureate program. It was about 20%, which is 1/5 of the total funding. So again, this will all be online, but key data points to keep in mind as we think about how we can support students and the institutions enrolling them moving forward in this changing landscape.
Thank you so much, Janette. I appreciate that. You know, that was, again, very concise. There's a lot of data that went into that and a lot of analysis, and there's more to unpack. And as Janette shared, our hope is that we will be able to make that available to you if you have questions and follow-up, or if you do at the end of this webinar. We'll be getting to that relatively soon. Happy to have conversations with you about it. But this yields a couple of questions, right? So we've got where are HSIs now, with a little bit of the history, the distinction between Title V and HSIs, that are more broadly, and then where we are with the CARES Act, which is one way you use the list, the definition, but also the list to get funding, and to see that these lists were not necessarily the same. It speaks to this bigger question given the changing landscape of what does it really fundamentally mean to serve your students, right? So we know that enrollment is a necessary precursor to serving students. But can an institution be enrolling without serving? I think we know in some of our work and others of you in the space that you can be enrolling and not necessarily serving, because serving takes more than just letting them in the door if you're going to get them across the stage. And I do think that's an important question that we need to think about as we go forward. The data showed between the 539 HSIs and 352 emerging HSIs that we have almost 900 institutions within the next 10 years that will hit the definition, the 25% undergraduate full-time equivalent Hispanic enrollment. And when you've got 900 institutions, that's a significant number. That's almost 1 in 4 institutions in this country. So what does it take to intentionally serve? That's a core question. And we think about, as the continued growth, will this changing landscape impact that? And how do we need to think about this? And as institutions are focused, given the pandemic and other situations, on the opportunity of better serving our students, can they transform in this, given the other challenges, the business model, the value proposition, the demographic shifts, to make sure that students are being served well? And what do institutions need to do to serve them better? So one approach that Excelencia has taken is really try to you got to go beyond enrolling. How do you reframe what it means to serve? And for us, we often say you cannot assume that demography and geography equals intentionality and impact, right? An institution could have hit that enrollment threshold because of changes in their community and where they're located. And when we see the concentration of Latino students in a small number of institutions. But that doesn't mean an institution has changed to serve them better. And that's the intentionality and impact that we're talking about here. One approach, not the only approach, but the way Excelencia is trying to see this is that we need to distinguish from institutions that are just enrolling to those that are serving. We can create a way of understanding serving. For us, that approach is to say, what are you doing with your data, your practice, and your leadership to make sure that Latino students amongst all students are served well? And our thought is that if we can show serving Latino students, this young, fast-growing population, will that not translate so that all students at an institution can be served better? Because you fundamentally have to transform to make sure that student is served well and they are representative of that post-traditional student overall. So back to the changing landscape. And I left a couple empty spaces here because I hope that we'll have some conversation from you all about this changing landscape. But I will say this, as we have taken a look at this at Excelencia, we've had forums, we've talked to presidents, we've talked to programs, we're constantly engaging with our community to know where things are. And I wanted to keep it simple. So here's what we know. Institutions that know who they serve, that means they know the students that are enrolling at their institution, they are more student ready and able to address. That doesn't mean that they have necessarily the resources to be as effective. Unfortunately, we know many HSIs and many serving institutions, even if they don't hit the 25%, are increasingly being challenged with the resources it takes to focus on being student ready and making sure we meet the students where they're at, rather than expecting students to conform to the traditional and the conventional approach to things. They might have limited resources, but we are seeing innovation and that commitment to mission. And that for us is a real distinguishing feature from institutions that are hitting an enrollment threshold. And maybe the definition of an HSI isn't explicit about mission, but there are institutions that are very focused on the mission of serving their students. We're trying to bring awareness and attention to that at the national and policy level, because we believe those are the trendsetters that we need to be paying attention to if we're going to transform higher education in a more meaningful way. But if you don't know who you're serving, and if you were surprised by the proliferation of the inequities we knew existed because of the articles and stories coming out about students, and there's a lot of work to be done to make sure as an institution that you're intentional in serving the students that you enroll. Not necessarily the students you want, but the ones that you have, in hopes that those should be the students that you want to provide the value add in their education. With that, I'd like to see if we can transition and ask Representative Gil Cisneros to give some thoughts, reactions, and takeaways to some of what we've shared about HSIs, serving students, and overall from the perspective you bring. Representative Cisneros? I don't know if you're muted. I'm sorry.
Time. Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. Thanks for the introduction, Deborah. I'm very excited to be here. I've been working, as you know, with you and Sarita at Excelencia for a long time, really focused on how we can improve education for Latinos throughout the country, and really putting the serving in HSIs and putting an emphasis on that. And it's very exciting to see, and I'm glad that Jackie and I, through our family foundation, have been a big supporter of Excelencia and really pushing this program of the seal of Excelencia to make sure that we are recognizing those institutions that are really going out there to serve the Hispanic community. As the data that you've shown, right, we are seeing the number of HSIs increasing. And it's going beyond, I think, just the geography right now. In California, you know, for example, more and more universities and colleges are becoming HSIs. For the longest time in the UC system, it was only UC Riverside and UC Merced that were the HSIs, but now that number has grown to include Irvine as well as Santa Barbara. And these institutions are really putting an emphasis on growing their Latino population and really servicing them, but not only enrolling them, but making sure they do, you know, cross the stage with a degree in hand. But there's a lot more that I still think that we can do. And now that I am in Congress, there is more that we need to be able to do. One of the things that I've done is we need to make sure that we do get more funding to our Hispanic-serving institutions. And that's why I signed on to a letter before the pandemic to make sure that we can go to the Appropriations Committee and ask them for an additional $355 million that would go directly to HSIs to help them with ensuring that we make sure that those students that are enrolling are graduating. As we look at the number of Latinos that are enrolled in school, and not just in higher education, but throughout all schools, the number is increasing annually, and soon in our K through 12, 1 in every 4 students is going to be Latino. And so we need to make sure that at the federal level, we are putting an emphasis and putting resources behind and educating our Latino community, because we are driving the nation right now. And I've been saying this for the longest time. The nation is only going to go as far as the Latino community is going to go, because our population continues to grow, and it will continue to grow into the future. And if we're being left behind, if we're not getting Latinos into college, if we're not ensuring that they're graduating with degrees and getting them into grad school, the economy, the country as a whole is going to suffer. So this is why we need to continue to put this emphasis on this. And this is why it's so important that we push those programs that are really truly serving the Latino community. And this is why I'm so excited that we now have the Seal of Excelencia to really recognize those programs. And we really need more colleges and universities to get behind into this program and become a part of it, and really put this emphasis going into the future. One of the things that we're seeing coming out of this pandemic is we know education right now, it's changing before our eyes. And I actually had a great conversation yesterday with the president of Cal State Fullerton, which is a Hispanic-Serving institution, about how they really had to transform and take all their classes, make them all online. And they know as they transition back into regular classes, they're not going to be able to put as many people in a classroom as before. So a lot of these lecture halls, these big lecture halls, you know, you're sitting in there with 100, 500 people, maybe even 1,000 in some university and colleges. You know, those are more likely for the future. Those are going to be online now. So they're adjusting, and they know they have to supply this equipment for our students, right? Like, as you said, not only at the higher education level, but really through our K through 12, we're really seeing the differences in what our communities have. You know, so many students are being left behind right now because they don't have access to high-speed internet. And this is an investment that we need to put in something that I've been working on for a long time now, to make sure that we invest in a national broadband program that's going to serve our urban and rural communities, that's going to get to the communities that are underserved, to make sure that they have access to high-speed internet. And so while we're seeing this at the K through 12 level, talking to the president of Cal State Fullerton yesterday, we're also seeing it at the higher education level. We need to make sure that students have access to computers, that they have access to high-speed internet, because really what we're seeing right now is pretty much going to be the future. Students will eventually go back to classrooms, but as I said, the class sizes are probably going to be smaller. There's going to be a lot more classes online, and we need to make sure that students have the resources so that they can be successful. And but I am very excited to continue on and to support, Excelencia. The seal of Excelencia is a program that, Jackie and I, through our foundation, are happy to continue to support. And really, it is important that we know, right, that we recognize those colleges and universities that are creating programs that are focusing on the Latino community and helping them get across the finish line, and not just enrolling them in college, but getting them with a degree in hand, and so that they can go on and be successful. And so I want to thank you for your great work, and keep it up.
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate your comments and your perspectives. I think we left a little bit of time. We want to make sure, we know we gave you a lot of information. I want to make sure that we get an opportunity to get some questions in. Also, while we're waiting on that, I think Emily Lavandera, who started, is going to be culling through some of those, and we'll see if there are questions for Beatriz or Janette or myself. I do want to let you know that before we close out, so you don't leave, is that we are going to post the analysis on the CARES Act. We're going to go through a little bit more. We were doing this as quickly as we could. So there'll be more information on our website, as well as the recording. We are also in the process at Excelencia of doing analysis on 25 years of HSIs, and I want to make it available for researchers so you can get all those data yourself, as well as the publications going forward. But we're open to questions. Emily, you want to read a couple for us, and we'll see how we can respond?
Sure. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a number of questions come in, but I'll start us off with one from Noelani, who asked, could you give us an example of a top HSI that leveraged federal or state funding to intentionally start a Latino student success institute or center?
Interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to answer that question. I mean, I'm not as versed on who's gotten Title V funding. Bea, do you know of any institution that's created a center?
There are a number of institutions that have created, not necessarily a center. I guess I would need more information, but they have created these places where students can go and seek assistance by peers, by other members of faculty. They can seek assistance from counselors. And so one that comes to mind is Pasadena Community College that has a location set up, as well as they've been able to transition to online services from these counselors, pathway counselors that they have. And I know some of your examples of Excelencia have also showcased some of the other Title V grantees that have done a great job of providing services through, for lack of better words, a center, but some central location where these students know they can go and seek services.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate that. Part of the challenge here is the ask about the use of federal and state funding, but and I'm not as knowledgeable about that for that purpose. We work with a lot of institutions that have created centers and information. In fact, one that earned the seal, University of Arizona, is doing the work, and others. But I'm sorry that I don't know if they use federal money in order to do it. The second part of your question, I think, Emily, is the one about have there been challenges for stakeholders and others when such an institute has been created? And I know that in our efforts, we do talk about being using a Latino lens and unapologetically focusing on our Hispanic students. That for us, that's not to the exclusion of others, but it's making sure we're paying attention to where Latino students are. There are some tensions on campuses to have the conversation, why pull out a certain student population amongst all. And our general conversation with them is to look at the data and see if we are truly educating all, you won't see disparities in educational progress and completion. And if you do, there might mean that there are issues that need to be addressed there to make sure that rather than an equal education, we're providing an equitable one. And so we think about that. And if the institution transforms, can that not serve all students better if we start looking at this population? So Emily, I'll give it back to you.
Sure, wonderful. So we had one specific question here. Thank you, Doctora Ceja, for your presentation. Where can we find the information you mentioned regarding the matrix and core expenditures for Title III and Title V, and is that available to the public?
It is available to the public, and you can actually find the published 2020 eligibility matrix. That is available on the department's website under the Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Thank you. So another question. It looks like promoting both post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic Americans programs was stopped in 2014, and that HSI STEM was also stopped in 2017. Will there be additional appropriations for these two programs?
So the Promoting Post-Baccalaureate program did receive additional appropriations in 2019, and we were able to award 20 new grantees with the monies that we were appropriated. I'm hoping that we do continue to get an appropriations because that would support the non-competing continuations. What tends to happen is that we get enough funding to support the out years. These are 5-year grants, so we get enough funding in POHA to support the out years. We haven't seen an increase beyond the money needed to support the out years to host new competitions. So that is what tends to happen with the appropriations that comes for that program. With the HSI STEM, we did receive additional money, so we will be hosting a competition in the near future for the HSI STEM and articulation.
Thank you. So here's a question specific to the CARES Act. Could you speak more to the MSI CARES Act? Are HSIs that have received more than $500,000 in the IHE CARES allocations eligible to receive funds?
Janette?
Yeah, that's, I did see that question in here, and I can follow back up with a little bit more information, but that funding, the additional $1 billion went to any institution that met the eligibility requirement. So even if in the initial $12 billion, the institution received more than the $500,000, they still received funding on top of that. So I'm just thinking like Cal State Fullerton, for example, had received a few million and still received an additional $1 million through the CARES MSI piece as well. So yes, you do not have to be under, this is separate from an additional pot of money that was also used for institutions that had received less than $500,000 in the initial $12 billion.
Wonderful.
Okay, thanks, Janette.
Thank you. So we have one here for Dr. Ceja. You mentioned the expanding post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic students program. The website for that program seems to suggest that the last time it was funded was fiscal year 2014. Is that program still being funded and are applications open?
For the POHA program?
Yeah, POHA.
Okay, yes. And just a correction for everyone, thank you for the honorary doctorate, but I've not earned mine as of yet. But so Beatriz is fine. With POHA, we had a competition in 2019. We will not have a competition in 2020 for POHA because we only got sufficient funding to fund the second year of those 20 grants that we funded in 2019.
Thanks, Pete.
Wonderful. So another question, the information presented so far has shown real emphasis on certain aspects of HSIs like student retention and enrollment. Are there institutional resources that aim to affect the culture at these HSIs? They also mentioned students can have access to resources, but if their campus culture is not welcoming or inclusive of Hispanic students, the distinction of HSI doesn't seem to necessarily match the mission of serving.
Is that for me or?
That was a general question.
Okay, because I think Deborah and I, we've had these conversations, and I think it goes to your point about how can these grant funds help to even change the culture of the institution by stress testing some of the support services that go beyond the academic supports, but
Yeah. And I think this is a continual challenge, right? So Title V are essential for institutions. Our analysis has shown at best it's maybe 1% of an institution's budget. It can be seminal for innovation and change, but it only to kickstart it. So what do we need for our students? I think it's going to take more than Title V to get there, and how we pay attention to the support services, the structures and opportunities are going to be key. And maybe as we look to reauthorization, we can think about some of those opportunities above and beyond where we are. I don't know if Janette, there's anything you want to add to that. Okay, go ahead, Emily.
Awesome. So another one, I am at a university that just this spring started the process to formally transition from an emerging HSI to one in full force. So their question is, as we are starting that formal transition, this coming fall, we will have a new president and new provost. What do you suggest we do to keep the process going and to maintain the university's commitment?
Sure. So I'll jump in on that one. At Excelencia, we have a network, an Excelencia in Action network, where we bring those together who are looking to expand and advance what they're doing to intentionally serve their students and hopefully bring that kind of meaning to what it means to be an HSI beyond enrollment. So I would encourage you to be part of this network. Reach out to us. We're happy to connect with you all, introduce you to others who might be in the same place. We have a good number of institutions that were emerging HSIs that have hit that enrollment threshold. And we have institutions that are not at the 25% yet, but are really intentional in serving overall. And so I think be part of this network of common cause and make sure that you are advocating what you know works best for your students. And if we can bring awareness and attention to that, we will. But also know that we know that the work is really happening at the institutional level, and we're happy to connect you with others that might give you some suggestions, pointers, ideas, share some frustrations, but also successes in their efforts and strategies. And I think the key point there is to continue your efforts, because it matters to your students, as you know, since you asked the question.
Wonderful. So here's one. For high school seniors graduating this year, what should they look for in colleges and universities when choosing where they will attend? Also, would you all recommend attending community colleges in the coming year, since colleges and universities will likely move online this fall?
Yeah, a great question. I'll take a cut at it, and if others want to jump in. For us, a lot of the focus on the institution you choose have to be a good fit for your needs and where you are. And then you do want to look at the quality of the institution and providing you that education overall. One of the reasons that we've created the Seal of Excelencia was to be able to see, are there institutions that are intentionally serving their students? Do they know who the students are? Can they meet the students where they are and their needs? Some of them are community colleges, some of them are four-year, some are public, some are private. Not knowing your geography or location, I do think that we know a lot of students make choices based on cost versus financial aid, on location and access. And so I guess if it's a good community college and it fits your needs and has opportunities, for example, if you have a baccalaureate aspiration, does it have a transfer program? I would say there are a couple of criteria that you should look for that. The second piece is considering the community colleges in the coming year. I think it's the same thing. You know, we are seeing intention of many students to go to a community college because it's nearby. It allows them to balance their work responsibilities, their family, and the uncertainty of room and board and space and availability. Community colleges can provide a very strong quality education. It's about also make sure that you bring that to it. Baccalaureate degrees are also core. So I'm not trying to be wishy-washy, but I do think it's a challenge to provide advice not knowing your background and what's a good fit. I think you should put together a series of questions about what you're looking for, your longer term goal, and then kind of interview the institutions to see those if they have what you need to bring your success together. And if you don't have that or you're not sure, then work with a counselor or somebody that can help guide you, especially if you're a first generation college goer.
Great. So we have quite a number of questions throughout asking how are other HSIs using the CARES funding, and if there will be any sort of impact study for these funding that's given to HSIs.
Yeah, Janette, I mean, you know, I know you look like data. I know we've done some work with institutions directly, but you want to start off?
Yeah, I mean, the most that we have on the CARES and how institutions are supposed to be using that is based on letters from the Secretary of Education, which required, well, I guess it depends on how you're thinking about it. Like if you're thinking about the bigger pot of money that they received, at least half of that must go to student emergency aid grants, and the other half can be used to cover any institutional expenses related to coronavirus. And then there are the HSI funding, the additional funding that HSIs received, those $200 million, that the stipulation there was just that it just continues to cover costs related to coronavirus, and if possible, make that, allow that funding to go to students directly. So that's what we have from the letters from the Secretary. I don't know if anyone else can speak more to a little bit of the back end of what will happen afterwards, if there'll be any sort of impact analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Bea, do you want to jump in? It's fine.
I was just going to say that at this time, we have obligated just a certain amount, so we haven't gotten all the funding out. So there's still some time in between getting the certification and getting the funding out. I do encourage everyone here to visit the department's website. There is a whole section of frequently asked questions in terms of for both the student portion as well as the institution portion. So I really encourage everyone to visit our website. We have a number of questions that can be answered through our documents on the website. And you can always email me and I will provide you the link for that website.
Right. And we can actually, at the end of this, we can also make sure those who registered and share that be along with this information. So thank you for that. I guess the other thing we'd add is that we are talking to institutions, and this is very fresh. This is very new. Many institutions are figuring out their strategy and approach. Part of the challenges we're facing is, especially for our Latino population, but overall, is what this means for our DACA students and for our Dreamers, and the challenges faced given some of the guidance from the Secretary about the use of funds and those that are Title IV eligible, which can exclude many of our Dreamers and others. We know institutions were already committed because the focus is on basic needs, and they weren't identifying by immigration status or overall. They were providing it to students based on need. Some of them got those resources out the door, and others are having to pivot because when that regulation came around, they had to make sure that it was incorporated as they went forward. So this is very fresh as institutions are going through it. We talked to a couple of institutions last week that were having to adjust and pivot. They hadn't gotten the money out the door yet. So it really is institution by institution that we are hearing stories of approach and getting information and funds out to students. And Emily, I don't know if we have any more, but I just want to be conscious of where we are with time, and I want to make sure that we're able to wrap up. So let me just say, Emily, that if you have questions that weren't answered, if it's not anonymous, if we have any, we will try to address them and we'll follow up. I also would encourage you to reach back out. Please do send us an email if you would like. We had shared the contact information a little bit earlier, and we'll reach out to our website. And if we can be helpful or direct you to someone who can get you the information you need, we're happy to do so. What we appreciate is your time and attention, paying attention to HSIs, this changing landscape, what we're seeing at the federal level, but also the intentionality of so many institutions to make sure that your students are served well. So thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to following up with you soon. Please do take a look at our website for more information, or reach out, as Beatriz Ceja mentioned, to get additional information. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Take care.